Hello, welcome to the Meeting Tent, a program dedicated to the work of Stan Tenen. Today we're discussing hand gestures, and we've been building up to this in previous episodes. But if you haven't seen those, I think you'll be able to follow along on today's program. But before we do that, let me introduce our regular cast of characters: Levanah Tenen, Michael Andron, Daniel Gill. So I would like to start out with an issue that has been with us in presenting this work, especially to the academic and rabbinic world. And that is, why don't we know about this? Why are there no references in any of the books on Judaica that line our shelves on Hebrew letters as hand gestures and a form of communication? We have books on Judaica lining our shelves, but I challenge you to find any chapters discussing hand gestures in regard to the Hebrew alphabet. But let me start out by saying that when Stan and Levanah wrote the book, and subsequent to that, Stan was sure that he had withstood any and all challenges to the veracity of his work. And that has continued. So we're pretty sure that the data holds up. So that being said, why isn't this known? Well, Stan addressed that, some of the reasons in the book. And, we have to kind of work backwards. We know that in the first half of the 20th century, especially in Western Europe and America, Jewish scholarship was at an all-time low. And there were reasons for this: the acclimation to Christian society, as well as economic depression and World War II, fighting fascism. So there wasn't a lot of time to really delve into some of these things. And so a lot of it emerged in the second half of the 20th century, studies of Kabbalah and spiritualism. So going back to the 19th century, and Stan alluded to this in the book, there was an attitude among linguistic scholars in regard to hand gestures, that they were regarded as emanating from primitive cultures. So any ideas regarding the value of hand gestures in communication and language were completely squashed. It just wouldn't have been acceptable to follow that idea. And so it wasn't followed, it wasn't studied. And then if you go back in history, there are clues that you have to kind of mine to find any other ideas on this. In the book he cites, and Daniel's brought this up in previous episodes, in 12th century Spain, Judah Halevi, the poet, discusses something called an inyan, which is a device that generates the letters. And there are other references from that period of time called the Golden Age of Judaism in Islamic Spain. Stan commented several times on the fact that his work was what would be considered First Temple. And so in that he was referring to the time of Solomon's temple and the time of King David, a period when the Torah had not even been written as a text. That wouldn't come later until the return of the Babylonian exile, when Ezra redacted the Torah and added the final letters. And so during that period of the First Temple, it would have seemed that the Kohanim and the Levites had carried this technical language stemming from the time of Moses, and when it was first received. In fact, if you think about the time of Moses, it's unlikely that this Torah or this form of information was written at all. Because if it had been written, it would have had to be written in pictograms, which would have been considered idolatrous. So you think about hand gestures and what they are, what they mean, and as we discuss them today, the relationship between inside and outside and what they represent, it starts to make sense. So in essence, we're on an archaeological dig in exploring this, and we hope to uncover this mystery as we go along. But today we're going to talk about the hand gestures themselves. Now, Michael, you have alluded in previous programs over the years that you were on a similar path of discovery. To me, one of the greatest tragedies is the fact that you weren't around.
Oh boy, me too. I feel that.
I mean, I just can imagine the kind of communications we would have had you been available. But the fact remains that at some point, you also came to this realization that there is something, a form of communication having to do with the Hebrew letters and generating hand gestures. Now, how did you, I'm sure this developed over time, but maybe you could, capsulize how this occurred in your studies.
Let me, before I directly answer that, let me point out something that is in a letter that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of all the Hasidic movements, he was the beginning of that about 250 years ago, wrote in a letter where he wrote that on Rosh Hashanah in 1746 had this amazing meditation, an elevation of his soul. And he saw amazing things he never saw before. And then, as part of this, he encountered the Messiah. And he said, when are you coming? Baal Shem Tov said, he said, well, you'll know that when your teaching becomes public and revealed in the world, and the wellsprings, your wellsprings burst forth to the farthest extremes, then everybody will be able to do that which I just accomplished in my meditation. Basically, the lesson there is that the world wasn't necessarily ready for something. It wasn't that it wasn't there. It was like someone may have seen it 3,000 years ago, but their mouth was closed. But that person knew that when you open your mouth, what's coming out of your mouth can be like inside your head with the closed mouth, you see it. The Hebrew letter, and this is in part an answer, but I just want to show this real simply. And it's a beautiful lesson that I was just reminded of the other day. The letter Pe, which means mouth, Pe, okay? And it looks like, not the final one, but the one here. It has a line across the top, and when a scribe writes it, they put a little upside down yud over here. I'm doing this backwards, so I'm having trouble doing it. And then the cross line. So now they have basically a bracket. And then they have to draw right over here an extra little place that catches in. Nobody understands why. Now the word Pe means mouth. And it makes sense because it looks like it's coming out of the mouth. But now don't look at the black fire, the black ink. Look at the white. And in the white, you have the letter Bet. And there's a very profound lesson in that. Let me just hold up the letter Bet for those who might, I can't imagine them knowing anything about Stan and not knowing about the letter Bet. But there is that letter Bet inside. And you see it in the white. Okay, it's like one of those optical illusion things that we get in the mail, you know? As soon as you open your mouth, there's duality. Know that every time you open your mouth, somebody can hear it this way, or they can hear it that way. it was clear as can be inside your head. And I have no doubt that Stan, when he envisioned this or had his breakthrough aha moment, or many of those moments along the way, he understood it perfectly. The hard part is communicating it. He did it very effectively because he was able to create graphics that made it easy for people to see, because he saw things in patterns and graphics and so on. The person who can't, who only has words, knows that words are terrible things. And they're very, very hard. Having said that, the Kabbalistic view is that every letter has dimensions of meaning and ideas. It has the shape, like the pei. It has a sound, p. It's like the letter P. Or without the dot inside, it's a f. It's an F. Okay? But it also has a number. It's 80. And it also has the form of the mouth, and it has a name, which in this case, they coincide. 80, also, you have the 7 dimensions of the world, the 7 days of the week. Shabbat is the end. And 8 is 1 day higher. They say that's why you do a bris on the 8th day. They don't want to be, we're not doing physical surgery, we're extending beyond it. So this path that I was led down made me look at the different letters. And the key one that I looked at, or the key 3 that I looked at first, well, first there was the shin and the mem, the aish and the mayim. The sound of those letters represent fire, shh, and water. And the word shalom, that lamed and vav connect them together. So the word shalom, which means, or shalem, which means whole, complete, peace, was represented by the letters. Those were the first ones that I learned. The next 3 that I focused my attention on were bet and resh and chaf. Now, when I was teaching this, one of my students said, are those just random? Why are you picking those? I mean, why those 3? Why not some other? I found something interesting about those 3. They're the only letters in the alphabet, whether you go by 22 letters or 27 letters with the finals, that have the value 2. Bet is 2. Aleph is 1. That's almost impossible to know, to the point that the Torah begins with a bet. And it begins with a bet, like a bracket, like the word bracha, a translingual pun. It starts like a bracket. And it says, what you learned over here before creation, maybe there were other worlds, maybe God was whatever. We can't really know that. Here's what we can know. We can know that from where the bracket is, the first letter of the Torah, everything from there on is knowable. It may require deep meditation and pondering and all the different levels of knowing, but it's possible. Well, bet and resh is 200. Bet is 2, resh is 200. And chaf is 20. They all have 2. They all have something that we're joining together. And right at the beginning of the Torah, in the section known as Lech Lecha, God says to Abraham, it's his first real discussion, leave, get out. Lech Lecha, which can be read as go inside yourself. Go inside yourself. Leave your home, it's physical. Leave your parents, that's your DNA. Leave all the stuff that's in the physical world and go to where I'm telling you to go and be a bracha. And those are those 3 letters, bet, resh, and chaf. So what does it mean to be a bracha, to be a blessing? What does that mean? And so I began to contemplate that from the flame in the tent that I was working from. What does that mean? Stan, with his translingual puns, did something incredibly profound, I think. And I will forever be grateful for, if nothing else, that lesson. Take the English word that sounds like b, r, and ch, or k, if you have a dot in it, okay? Bathe yourself in it. Just be bathed by the light that's around you. when you feel it tingling in your hands, reach for it. R. The word is resh, sounds like roach, rosh, Hebrew like Rosh Hashanah, but is also, forget about roach. We don't want roach. Okay, rosh is good, but we have, what do we have there? We have, first, just bathe in it. But that's not enough. You can't just go out in the sun. You want to reach for it. You look at the moon, you say, oh, that's beautiful. But you want to get in a spaceship and you want to go there and see what it's like. So bathe in it, reach for it, and then bring it back. Bring back that little yud, that 10. Bring it back, bring it down in between your cuffs. I wore a long sleeve shirt today on purpose, but cuffs, okay? But it means palm. And it makes sense that the word means palm, because what is the palm? Why do we call a palm tree a palm? It's because it looks like a palm. It's the trunk and hands. And it means the palm of your hands. So we're saying that in the letters, in the gestures of the letters, bet, resh, and kaf, and you guys will get into Stan's exact way that he pictured it, but I didn't know that. I just had a very simple action. And from doing martial arts, it became like a qigong form. I felt the energy. I reached for it. I bathed in it, bathe. I bathed in it. I reached for it up by my head. I brought it back between the palms of my hands. And then I extended it. I extended my hands, 2 hands, 10 fingers, the 10 sfirot. I extended it in my hands. That spells out the word bracha. Be a blessing. Be somebody who bathes in divine light, who reaches for it spiritually, soulfully, mentally. Reach for it, bring it back into this world, internalize it, and then extend it. Extend your hand out. And that meditation was exactly how I started doing all of this.
So you were on this parallel journey in a different way. I mean, if you watch Stan's journey and how he came to this, obviously he came up with a model first and then was looking for a way of personalizing it, of making it, of demonstrating the relationship between inside and outside. And the model itself was an external model, and he was looking for some sort of internal relationship. The ability, and then he found that the hand was what he called a general projective principle. The connection between inside and outside, projecting inner consciousness with physical reality. Daniel, when you first learned, when you met Stan and got into this, into his discovery, he had already developed the hand gesture, is that correct?
Yeah.
So how did you feel? I mean, especially being a musician and seeing how the hands are so vital in the making of music.
Yeah, there's a piece, I think Rabbi Nachman has a beautiful piece about the like life fixing of a person who plays stringed instruments, believe it or not, and how the differentiation between right and wrong with your fingers on your hand is some great tikkun of music. And that's a pretty interesting piece. So, I mean, I think I mean, music is by its nature spiritual. And I mean, it's interesting, Michael was talking about words and they can be misconstrued. There's a great story when Beethoven wrote his great mass. He wrote a mass called Missa Solemnis, which is really his masterwork. It's actually, I think, on a higher level than the Ninth Symphony. It's absolutely astonishing piece of music. But when he wrote it, the church officials would not play it because what he did with that piece was he went from God with a small g, which is what they wanted, the God that tries to control everyone, to like God, you know, like really God. And so it freaked out the church. They said, you know, we can't have that. You know, it's real spirituality. We can't have that kind of thing going on here. And so it only got performed as like a concert piece. And then I think eventually they tried, but still, it's not a famous mass in the Catholic Church, precisely because it's so spiritual. And the message, even though the words are of the Roman Catholic Church, are pretty specific, the musical message is utterly clear and goes beyond the words. And so you have music, which is, it can be misconstrued, but it's a much more precise form of language. And I feel like when I saw and started understanding the gestures, internally, it's the closest form of language, or it might even be a progenitor of the musical language. Like there's some deep connection there, that the gestures have a deeper connection to something I'm familiar with, which is music. And so it felt somehow very familiar to me.
Music and dance, you know, just in any, you know, basic society, music and dance, they're really a part of each other. They're related. I can recall actually many, many years ago when you and I and Stanley did a very poorly attended demonstration of your the creation overture that you wrote, which is based on the Hebrew text of the first 3 verses of Bereshis.
Yeah.
You know, so the music was played and I demonstrated the gestures, and it really feels like a dance to me. You know, I mean, it's very, the music was expressive and the gestures just went with it. The one real professional dancer who is, you know, in our extended group, saw that very poorly made video. And, you know, she said, oh, wow, you know, this really is a dance. So I hear what you're saying, you know, that if you can hear and feel music within you, which as a composer you certainly do, that gestures and that music makes something in you want to move. And so that they are, you know, they're like 2 halves of the same impulse. Okay.
No, it's amazing. No, what you're saying. So I think that you hit it, like you reminded me, or a thought that I had never thought before. Like you sparked something like what those forms in the Hebrew letters are about, these forms and ideas and energies, or whatever you want to call it, that are greater than we are, or that are more like at the essence of what we are. And so we can only, you know, the greater emotions, we can only dance them out. We can only move them out, or we can write a symphony, or write some music, or something that to try to express these things, which are so big, you know? And so I feel like what Stan did in this, with this, the model and the gestures, is give access in a very precise way to these very, very much larger forms of energy and ideas, or whatever you want to. I can't put it in words, but this much larger thing, and emotions, and it has, I think, more to do with, like, as opposed to where we are, which is in the physical world, where our souls might come from. You know, these much larger gestures or things, and to kind of to bridge that gap between, like, where, and you know, whatever a person believes, this is how I believe, to bridge the gap between where the soul comes from and then where the soul incarnates through something physical. Is, as they'd say in Israel, it's peladik. It's in Yiddish, it's peladik. It's wondrous, you know, really wondrous. Yeah. what you both
Well,
did.
that's a great word. I'll have to remember that.
Pelodic, yeah, it's great. It's from the word pella, which means
Yeah.
yeah, pelodic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great one. Yeah.
There's also, there's another connection that Stan brought out in terms of using hand gestures in the ancient world. He makes a distinction between the common vernacular that people used as we do today over different cultures, and the technical language of the time, and which he attributed to the Levites and the Kohanim, who then would have used their technical language would have been the hand gestures. They were carrying the Torah in that form of language. And then obviously music today is a technical language, unlike our vernacular. So that there's a definite connection. There's also the connection of music to Solomon's temple and King David. And so I think it all fits together, and maybe is part of the development of music, in society. And it's interesting to kind of look at that and look for those kinds of connections. I mean, I wouldn't call conducting a hand gesture language, or maybe it is. I don't know.
I don't know.
It
Levanah,
depends on
do
who's.
you want to take that?
It depends on who's doing it.
It's doing it.
Yeah. Do you want to explain about Toscanini, or?
Yeah, just a little bit. Toscanini,
Yeah.
Arturo Toscanini, for those of you who don't know who he was a very famous and very long-lived classical music orchestra conductor. He was known for the precision of that he could get out of his orchestras. And I can recall, he was certainly the favorite interpreter, particularly of Beethoven, actually, that Stanley had. I won't go into many details here because it's not really the topic, but there are video recordings of Toscanini conducting at the end of his life, and despite all of the reviewers or for whatever, saying, oh my goodness, how did he get this precision? How did he get what he got out of the orchestras performing? And I looked at him as somebody who played a stringed instrument in high school days, so I had a little bit of experience. And I just opened my eyes and said, wait a minute, all you have to do is just watch the man. He tells you exactly what he wants to do in this language of conducting. It's not flashy like Leonard Bernstein. Some people may have watched Young People's Guide to the Orchestra when they were very small. Bernstein was expressive, but not precise. Toscanini was controlled and immensely precise. And literally, if you're a musician, all you had to do is watch the man. So I would say conducting really is a language.
The thing about Stan and Toscanini is, as a child, he told me this story. He used to watch Toscanini, and it just occurred to me, this thought that may Stan's soul have an aliyah, like a very young Stan Tenen watching hand movements which corresponded to emotion in his mind. That he was listening to the music. And it just like it could. I remember he said, Toscanini is central. Like he had that picture of Toscanini.
Yeah.
And yeah, like perhaps that was somehow in his life's journey, like to kind of drop the little idea that there's a connection between the hand and emotion.
Yeah,
and because he always talked about the hand gestures. It's not even the idea of, I mean, it is the idea of the letters, but it's the underlying emotion of each letter, the underlying energy of each letter. That is what we want to get to, and
what you feel when you gesture it.
Right.
Well, it's like what I said before. It comes into the head, into the soul, and then it spirals out. And the letter P, when you write it by hand, looks like that very famous drawing of that Stan deals with all the time. this spiral curve coming out of nature.
Right.
That's right.
But once it comes out of your mouth, it becomes a problem. And math and music and dance are, and being a theater guy, I used to think, well, why would I want to watch dance? I'd rather hear what the actor's got to say, spell it out for me. But even those are very carefully crafted words. They're not the way people naturally talk. They're very carefully crafted. The precision is the key. And people who do American sign or any sign language, it's fascinating to watch.
But getting back to Stan's his progression in terms of having a hand model and not feeling that there was more to it than casting shadows. And so the next phase was, or he had developed the meanings of the letters. He had associated the meanings, the standard meanings of the letters with the shape of the model. So at some point, he realizes that the model is a hand, a model.
What does the shadow mean? In other words, here's the shadow,
right?
And it looks like that, but doesn't mean anything,
right?
Until you uncover the meaning.
Right. So now he has the model, and it was interesting before you used the three letters Beit, Resh, and Kuf. And if you look
Kaf,
if you look on his matrix of meaning chart, that's the vertical alignment, although it's Beit, Kaf, and Resh, but it doesn't matter.
Right, number order,
because it was the twos involved.
220, 200.
Exactly. So at some point, there's a correlation between the meaning and the gesture, and it'd be interesting to know how long that took for him to develop to get to that point, so that we
Not
could
long at all. I mean,
it couldn't have.
Because he already had come to the conclusion that the meanings, that there's traditional meanings for each of the Hebrew letters, at least each of the 22 in the 22 set, and that's just anybody who learns to read Hebrew, the meanings of the letters, and that's just kind of part of your consciousness. Well, most of those meanings are nouns, and at some point, I don't know the sequence of I don't know what prompted this, but he felt that actually what was important was that the meanings were not nouns, they were verbs. He needed to think of what the verb corresponding meaning would be. So he already had a sense that he had developed exploring their potential meanings as verbs before he discovered that the model was not intended to cast shadows, that the model was intended to be worn and to guide you in making hand gestures. And then it seemed to him to make sense that, put the model on your hand. What kind of gesture can I make that will both show me the letter and somehow mean the meaning? And that original letter, the Beit, the one that goes, it's not showing here, the one like this, basically, which is a universal gesture, Michael, as you pointed out either last night or today, of somebody asking for something. Chimps do it. It's like, give me, please, or not please if you're a chimpanzee, or whatever. And going from that idea to, okay, and I see a Beit here. Okay, break open. And so I know it took him a whole bunch of time, just in terms of months or whatever, he tried all kinds of gestures and all kinds of combinations. And mostly he was doing this in his own study where I wasn't watching, so I'm not sure exactly what he did. But just as the way he worked was to, in almost anything, was to figure out what he needed to find and then try out many different methods to see what would work. One of the conclusions that he came to, and that he always stressed in his later videos, was that, okay, assuming that the letter gestures were preserved, or used in various different communities, or may have been, that different communities which were physically separated, back when the only way to travel was, by sailing ship or by donkey, that people might have developed somewhat different variations of where the letters might be seen in a way that would be natural and arouse the feelings in a way that would be natural for that particular community. So the gestures don't actually have to exactly match. What's important is the feeling that one has corresponding to the meaning of the letter, corresponding to being able to see that letter.
I'd like to now show the audience the hand gestures, so we can then go, further our discussion. And in terms of a timeline, I know the first public presentation that Stan did was in 1989, and it's now our videotape called Geometric Metaphors of Life. Now, when we filmed the video called Dance of the Hebrew Letters, I believe that was
1991.
Or 91, yeah.
Yeah.
So we did this at your house in San Anselmo, so kind of a studio thing. And so here is Stan doing, and if you watch this video, he goes through a small, a short kind of a preamble, and then he goes through the letters, which we're going to play now. And then he goes through each letter separately. And he talks about the fact that they're still being developed and that there may be different variations. So let's see if I can do a share screen.
We're only going to do the 22-letter alphabet now. In the past, we've attempted to generate the 27 this way. I've come to believe that it's the 22-letter alphabet that's the key for this system now.
That's actually wrong.
And leave the finals for another time. The finals appear on the hypersphere in the idealized 27-letter set. This is the linear 22-letter set mapped onto the alphabet, mapped onto the bodies. Sorry. Okay, here, let's do it. I can see now an Aleph, and I'm going to unfurl it and say the letter name as I do it. Now I'm looking down at towards my waist, and in my hand, I see the K shape, that Rashi Nachmanides Aleph. Now, if I do this motion, I get Beit. Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, Het, Tet, Yud, Chof, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Hey, Tzadi, Kuf, Resh, Sheen, Tav. I'm going to go through it again.
Okay, so so what was incorrect there, Levanah?
Oh, actually, maybe about, let's see, that was 91. Maybe about 12 years after that, we actually did develop and determine gestures for the 5 final letters, which you will find actually in our book. And they are more expansive than the corresponding medial letters. But we, it's kind of not relevant here. I just wanted to say that in fact, just as he said at the beginning of that, just as Bill said, development continued, and all that many years later, we did find a set of gestures for the final letters, which each of them in their own way expresses finality. So I just, and I'm sorry that I interrupted there, but.
No, that's fine. So, so what do you do with these gestures? How do you use them? One of the, the first, possibility is to take a text and do it in gestures. And Stan addressed that idea. And let me play that one.
Also, I'm only going to show you the letters in alphabetical order: Aleph to Beit to Gimel to Dalet to Hey to Vav, etc. If you're reading a text, you have to go between any letter and any other letter. And that's not the same as alphabetical order. That's why we believe in Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, they give a multiplication table for all the letters. And they take the 22-letter alphabet, they skip the letters that connect to themselves, and they go Aleph times Beit, Aleph times Gimel, Aleph with Dalet, Aleph with Hey, Beit with Aleph, Beit with Gimel, etc. The whole multiplication table. You multiply it out, you get 231 possibilities, not counting reversals. We would have to master all of those 231 transitions before we could actually read the text. That's the next step.
It's a next step that never really happened, unfortunately. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, when you realize that there were 231 possibilities, and that every letter has a form, a name, and a number, and every one of those three have a world, soul, and divinity from classical Kabbalistic stuff, and you start multiplying probabilities, it's endless. And I remember a discussion that I did have with Stan, because he mentioned a letter at one point, we were discussing it, and I asked him about it. I said, I have a totally different meaning that I use for that particular letter. He said, yeah, absolutely. It's a work in progress. There are always going to be other deeper meanings. I'll give you one example. Tzadi Kuf, 90 and 100, those two numbers. Okay, Tzadi, the name for it is tzaddik, a righteous person. Kuf is a monkey. And you think, well, that's an odd juxtaposition of letters when they're in order. After we become a righteous person, a saint, then a monkey? I mean, we think of monkey mind as where the mind is just jumping around like a monkey. But I remember a lesson that my teacher once said. He said, you have to have the two most important things that a student needs to become a master of this. He said, you need to have, you have to be a serious student, and you have to have a sense of humor. And in the martial arts, monkey is a mischievous, fun kind of style and character. The Monkey King is very popular in Chinese culture. So in that culture, monkey has a different meaning, a specific meaning. When we say monkey, that's what we think of. And just by choosing those two meanings, it says, you want to be a saint? Keep a sense of humor. If you get too serious in what you're doing, you're going to lose it. You have to have both. You have to find a balance in your life. So that's just two letters with two specific meanings that teach a whole lesson about living. Mm-hmm. Imagine the infinite number of 231 times 9 meanings of each letter times each of the alphabets and the shape. It's never ending. It's never ending. If he had another 45 years of doing this, it would still be never ending.
Yeah.
And that's a, what was the word you used? The Pelagic. That's a Pelagic concept.
Pelagic, yeah.
I love that word. That's great.
It's a great word.
It's just there it is. That's the mind is being blown like a cartoon.
Yeah.
So Stan's talking about taking a text and using the hand gestures to follow the text, and it hasn't been done. I mean, I think I did. I'll see if I can find it. I animated the hand gestures from his poster, and I know that I went through. I think I did the first paragraph of Genesis, just
Or
to
the
see what it
first
looked like.
verse. Yeah.
I did the first verse. I don't know if I might have gotten a little further. I'll check. Who knows? Who knows? Who can remember anything? So, but it doesn't really give you anything, just looking at that, as far as I could see. Again, we're talking about a form of communication. And then if you then go back and think about the Kohanim and the Levites, how they were using these gestures, in what form and for what purpose, it staggers the mind, because we don't think in terms of that level of spirituality, because again, it's a verb. So it's obviously some action involved in terms of expressing something that they might have made happen, as a storyteller, a screenwriter. I like to take that idea and turn it into something that, is spectacular, but that's not going to be academically, acceptable.
Yeah.
Well, the neat thing is that when I've done these gestures a bunch of times, and I've used them in prayer specifically, and just trying to figure out deeper meanings of Hebrew words. I used them once in Psalms to try to figure out a certain verse in Psalms. Very amazing. But what happens is I actually can do it in my mind. Like, I can do the gestures in my mind, and imagine myself doing the gestures, and kind of almost get a similar thing happening, which is, I think, pretty astounding. But I just did 231 is Reish Lamed Aleph, right? That would be how you'd write that number, Reish Lamed Aleph. So if you do the Reish, right? It's almost like, it comes to mind for me as like, Reish, like I'm strong, I'm strong and focused. Reish, your head. It's like your biggest strength actually is not here, it's here. So Reish, you're strong and you're focused. But if that's where you stop, then it's like, so what? So then Lamed is more like, Lamed. You're looking at your, there's the Lamed there. You're questioning, you're opening up a little bit, right? And then what happens is you come back down to your pupik, so to speak. You come back down to your stomach. You come back down to your deep, deep insides. So when in that sense, even just the number Reish Lamed Aleph, all of a sudden you've learned like a little bit of insight into what Sefer Yetzirah is asking us to do. It's asking us to learn the language, right? To use our mind to learn the language of the inside. Of the deep, deep inside.
Nice.
But through ourselves.
End of the Aleph, which is the primary letter where everything comes from. It's out of the Aleph, you get the bet that goes around to the final tzadi. It's built into that letter.
It is, but it's the gesture. What's neat about the gesture is that it's pointing to our stomach, like it's not, it's, as the Torah itself says, it's not me'ever hayarden. It's like, it's not across the waters. It's right with you, right? And it seems to me this teaching, the Reish Lamed Aleph, it's like the Sefer Yetzirah is teaching us something absolutely essential when you understand what Stan is saying. It's kind of the cipher to the Sefer Yetzirah. It's teaching us that if you want to learn the language of the inside, the deep, deep energetic patterns that you're a part of, then this is the way to do it. And I think that learning Stan's the alphabet and the gesture and the gestures and with the hand model that Stan found, I think he opened a key for humanity to learn the language of the deep, deep inside where we all kind of come from.
Because we have that all in common, and it doesn't matter what your culture is, what your religion is, what your language is. Our insides are pretty much the same. We just express it differently and are limited with cultural biases. And I think that's what he kept talking about, is a universal language. And people couldn't figure that out. How could that be a universal language? There's a lot of learning involved in that. And so, one of the projects, and we have many at Meru Foundation that, we'd like to get funded, is to really develop this idea and to go forward. Levanah, you did a video also of the hand gestures. if you recall. I have, or were it just photos?
It was just photos.
Just photos, right.
Yeah, those are the photos that we used actually to get basically
Get the
when we were
drawings.
actually producing the alphabet that changed the world. We needed, in addition to the drawings of hand gestures, which had already been done by an artist who was actually viewing Stanley and then she drew it. We also felt we really needed photographs. So I stood there and made gestures for the letters, and Stanley corrected me in terms of what he wanted to see. And then he would take a photo from the angle, basically the angle of my eye viewing. Those are the photos in the book are just of my hands. And I noticed, a lot of people have noticed that in what's printed in the book, it looks like some letters appear to have the same gesture, but in fact, if you can see the whole photograph, which was, at least the upper half of my body, depending on where we were standing when we took them, you can see that the gestures they may look the same if you just look at my hand, but they're actually in different places on my body. And so, yeah, the closest thing to me doing a video of the gestures is that really poor video that I spoke about,
right.
With Daniel. But we took photos of the 22 and then the final letters as well.
It's interesting what you just said about the hand, just showing the hand looks the same, because when Daniel just did the Resh, his arms were part of that. I mean, that really demonstrated. So, yeah, I mean, it's and then what Adele did show that the whole body can be involved in this. It's not.
And if you watch, if you have an opportunity to see work by a professional dancer choreographer, Adele Packer, she has been working with the gesture letters for several years, and basically training an amateur company of almost all non-Jewish people who had no idea what Hebrew letters were like at all, to do dances that were inspired by the letter gestures. And her gestures are somewhat different for some of the letters, and that's okay, because she catches the meaning. But this is how her dancers' experience and her life experience expresses that meaning, and you can still see the letter. Or you could if she had models. She wasn't working with models at the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it would be good if we could get her on here and maybe talk about her perspective, because there's not a lot of people that we can get who have a perspective, because people haven't been working with this. We've gone over an hour, so we're going to cut this short, or cut it, not short. But maybe we can pick up on this on our next episode, because this is really an important topic, and maybe think about what it would take to go forward with the gestures, besides having funding and be able to set it up as a project. But if we did, let's do a kind of a wish type of a situation. How could we see this going forward? As what would it take? What it look like, and what would be the benefit of following the path of developing the hand gesture language? So maybe we'll talk about that in our next episode. But for today, thank you as always, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Take care.